So business leaders, I think, have been waiting for this for a long time, and now the time has arrived. My name is Andrea Derler. I'm Visier's principal researcher, which means I study workforce trends, I study the labor market, and I study what's best for people and workforce analytics. I was really inspired by our customers who were early adopters of V, which is Visier's generative AI assistant. So early adopters are always inspirational because they're the first to try something out. They're willing to change their culture, be the first to experiment with a new capability, in this case, V. And what I really wanted to uncover is, beyond the tech hype around AI that you read about in the media, I wanted to know, what's the actual value add of generative AI for workforce analytics? Is there a value add? Is there really a significant advantage by using generative AI capabilities, or is it more like a nice to have? There was not just one big insight, but if I had to summarize, my own main takeaway from this research was that the value add of generative AI applies to a larger population than I expected within an organization. Think about the people analytics, the workforce analytics team. Of course, they benefit. They're the first, they were part of the early adopter program. But then there are other populations, such as the wider HR functions. There are HR BPs, human resource business partners, who sit between HR and the business, and there are the business leaders themselves. So it's a very nuanced value add for a larger population than I expected to find. It's really almost as if we've envisioned GenAI or our system V to be accessible to democratize data across the business, and that's actually really happening. So that is really the most insightful takeaway for myself in terms of how many people now can suddenly do analytics, workforce analytics, that never used to do workforce analytics before. Well, leaders want data in the flow of work because they've been missing that piece when they make important decisions. In the past, they had financial data, they had business data, but the important piece about how talent, how their employees, how their workforce impact their business data has been missing in the past. That led to perhaps decisions that they regretted afterwards. They hadn't quite been able to think it through properly. What's the impact of this decision on my workforce? So that's one piece. I think the expectation of business leaders has evolved over the years. We've been hearing a lot about very capable technologies such as Visier. And if the organization itself wasn't able to adopt a technology like that, there was always this unmet expectation. Why still does it take me days and weeks sometimes to get an insight? Now, I can actually access a database here and now with live data, live results about my workforce, about the business and productivity that the workforce achieves. And that really is now a possibility that has become reality. And to a large degree, it has become reality because GenAI capabilities such as Visier's V is accurate, super secure, and gives you the answer in the flow of work. So business leaders, I think, have been waiting for this for a long time, and now the time has arrived. One customer of a significant impact that the GenAI capability really delivered was given by one of our wonderful customers who told me a nice anecdote. He was on the way home after work on the bus, and his boss texted him and asked him, what's the headcount ratio for HR in comparison to the wider population of the business? And that's not a simple question, and he didn't, of course, have his laptop up. So he thought, well, why don't I just ask V, which is Visier's GenAI assistant, and asked it the question here, right there on the bus on the way home, and got the result, which turned out next day because he checked it, was completely accurate. So imagine now that's suddenly possible. You don't have to wait, you don't have to log in, you don't have to create an analysis that is also still in need of interpretation. You get an answer about a relatively complex question about your workforce here and now. That is an example that will always stick to me because that's unprecedented. And this is opening up so many more possibilities of answering those tough questions in the here and now, in a way that everybody can immediately relate to it and understand it. But V raises the bar when it comes to delivering data where and when people need it. because it delivers insights in natural language in the meeting accurately, securely, right here now. So it is really the ease of use of a complex capability of analytics, bringing together data sources from talent, from business, and securely integrating all those data points and delivering them in enormously fast ways. So that is really where V shines. So V with Visier really improves the efficiency in the way that leaders can give insight and gain insight into the way the business impacts people and the way people impact the business, because it does something very, very complex underneath the surface. But again, the business and the HR leader doesn't really notice the complexities behind it because the technology is so solid. All they see is an incredibly easy access, a great user experience where they can answer a complicated question in their own natural language and get an insight out of the system based on their own data, also in natural language. We all know that data is accumulating in organizations by the second, by the minute. So if unused, this remains to be dark data, which means that's unused data that it costs us only money to be stored, but it really doesn't give any strategic advantage. People analytics teams have been increasingly hit by the fact that we are increasingly having more data in the organization. That means they've also received a lot more requests by HR and business colleagues to get some insights about the business. So basically, the inquiries about data and analytics have increased. The teams usually have stayed the same. Nobody has added a lot of headcount in recent months. So what generative AI can now really do is enable those people analytics leaders in those teams to answer more questions much faster. So the most obvious factor is they have fewer inquiries to self-serve by HR and business leaders. So it means instead of 300 requests a week, I'm getting 200 or 150. That's an obvious one. But what was really interesting was it also helped the people analytics team members gain deeper insights about the business itself. They can look at the queries, they can look at the prompts that have been asked. So that means they can also learn about those questions that come in the most often. Of course, there is less time spent on creating answers because that's what the GenAI assistant V does really well. But it also has reports on improved accuracy. I received several comments about it now gives us better answers, more accurate answers than what we were able to interpret before. We also have fewer bottlenecks because the inquiries can, to some degree, through democratization and easier access by others, access themselves directly. So the business leaders can, if they have access, go to V themselves and ask the question. But I love the fact that there seems to be an overall improvement of data maturity in an organization using a tool like V because of the accuracy, because of the adoption that's increased so much. People analytics teams have become more efficient. They do less of the work that really wasn't all that fun, which is that data crunching, and they do more of the interesting work, which is providing more strategic advice and insights. For years to come, I believe the role of a people analytics leader will now be to help the business and HR function leads who are now asking for more data to transform their queries into meaningful questions, to help them understand their own business better, by helping them interpret those findings. There's still a lot of translation work that's necessary, even though the insight that comes back from generative AI is very clear. But there's a lot of contextualization that people analytics team members do nowadays. Leaders are reacting in a variety of ways to the oncome of GenAI, and I'm talking about specific to workforce and people analytics. That's the space that we're in. I think I see a variety of reactions from very excited to skeptic to fearful. And now and again, that's where the translator role comes in that we all have, and the way that change management will make a really big difference is how are we responding to that oncome of GenAI in our workplace. I think we may all feel the same. There's a sense of uncertainty in terms of how is it going to change my job? How is it going to affect my tasks? So we are all, rightly so, curious to the best and maybe fearful at worst about this outcome. When we explain from the Visier side, and when we explain how V operates and how it can add value to somebody's job, I think people are listening for sure with interest. It is really hard not to be curious about the possibility to have access to data instantly. I think there are nuggets of information that will inspire people analytics leaders who are still a little skeptical about the value add. That's why we did this research. So there's a lot of explaining to do. There's a lot of transparency that needs to happen right now. AI cannot be a black box. The more we open up that black box and explain exactly how the models work, how the technology works, what it can do, what it can't do, who can do what with it, I think over time we will open up the populations of inspired and curious and move us away from being fearful and being worried about it. The main takeaway for business leaders interested in generative AI capabilities for workforce analytics is that they have now access to accurate live employee data. That hasn't been the case before. They've always envisioned it. They always wanted to have those insights delivered to them, but it's been complicated in the past. And now they can link business data with talent data as well. So basically, they have now a capability that they can sit in an important business meeting and access important talent data in terms of headcount, who are our high performers, where do we need to do more workforce planning for the next 6 to 9 months? These are questions that usually took a few hours or a few days to answer. Now they can be answered here and now in natural language. The whole role of the idea behind offering GenAI to business leaders was to democratize data. So the data doesn't lie siloed in a people analytics or HR team, but that it becomes accessible by a much wider population than before in an organization. We have now real-time insights in business meetings. We don't need to specifically reserve some time, a couple of hours or days, sometimes weeks, to gain an insight about our workforce because we can access this information here and now. It also leads to a growing data acumen by leaders. That's become visible in conversations I've had in organizations, simply because it has become much more easy for business leaders to access information about their workforce with a tool like V. They're also building their own data acumen. They're learning how to ask better questions. They're learning how to interpret insights for their own business to really support their own decision making. Currently, the next big frontier for embedding more data in the flow of work is certainly the integration of business data with talent data. That is where I see a lot of energy going towards. Makes sense. If we want to democratize data about talent to business leaders, we have to have the ability to integrate business data with it. Business leaders, would only have half of the story if they only were to look at talent data. So business data is important. So that means business data, finance data. For example, they need to know headcount, but why? How does headcount affect our ability to deliver certain projects, certain contracts? What is our performance across business units, across teams? How are we integrating tools like information from ServiceNow or Jira or other tools so we understand exactly how certain talent, trends actually affect our ability to perform? So these are the next big questions that organizations are already starting to answer with Visier. But I think there's a lot more that we'll see come out of that. Why? Because finally we are able to technically actually combine data sources from not just the talent HRS systems, but also from the business. So very exciting things to come. And AI is going to amplify that further. But I think the conversation around data and which data sources should be actually in the model, that's going to come first.